If you have ever felt like your paint just doesn't want to cooperate, like it either won't cover or it runs everywhere and you end up spending more time fighting it than actually painting, then there is a reason for that, and the solution is much simpler than you might think. So in today's video, I'll show you how to thin and control your paints. First, in my opinion, one of the most important things when it comes to dilution. Here we have a red and a brown, which I am going to dilute with roughly the same amount of water as paint. You might think maybe it is a bit too much water, but it will serve perfectly to prove a point. As you can see, when I go to apply the red, it provides little to no coverage. At best, we could use this mix as a glaze. However, when I move on to the brown, we suddenly get a much more respectable amount of coverage. Same amount of paint, same amount of water, but different results. So what should you take away from this? We are always told to slightly dilute our paints when painting, but no one ever tells us exactly how much we should dilute them. The best answer a beginner usually gets is the classic aim for a milky consistency. But in reality, as you just saw, different colors will require different amounts of dilution, depending on what you are trying to achieve, whether that's a base coat, a layer or a glaze. And this doesn't just change from color to color, it also changes between paint brands. So in the end, there is only one true answer to the question, how much should I dilute my paints? And that answer is, it depends. Of course, there are some general rules, like yellows often having a weaker coverage, but your paints might behave very differently from the ones you see in tutorials like this. So instead of giving you a fixed recipe that may or may not work for you, what I want to do is show you how to figure each color out for yourself, not by memorizing ratios, but by understanding what to look for, so that no matter the color, the brand or the situation, you can quickly adjust and get the result you are after. But before we get into that, we need to talk about the second important point, and that is, how do I get my paint to go exactly where I want it? And this has one simple solution that applies to every color. Back to the palette, here we have the same gray we've been using. Again, diluted roughly a 50-50 water to paint ratio. Now, if after mixing or picking up paint, your brush looks like this, then there's your problem. You have too much paint on the brush. As you can see, even when I lightly touch the surface, and I am not pressing down at all, the bristles barely spread, yet the paint still runs uncontrollably out of the brush. So to avoid this, after mixing or whenever you pick up fresh paint, you want to rinse your brush and then pick up paint only about halfway up the bristles. And as you work the paint into the brush, twist and pull it slightly so that the tip becomes sharp again. Like this. I know this sounds tedious and not particularly fun, especially when this is supposed to be a relaxing hobby, but I encourage you to slow down for a moment and pay attention to what's happening before the brush even touches the model, because while this might feel awkward at first, it very quickly becomes second nature. And more importantly, it saves you the frustration of paint going everywhere, and replaces it with something much more satisfying, the feeling of actually placing the paint exactly where you want it to go. So, now that we have covered those 2 points, how dilution behaves differently depending on the color, and how to actually control the paint once it's on your brush, let me show you something that changed the way I approach all of this. Because like I said before, I can't give you an exact ratio for every paint, but what I can give you is a simple way to figure it out every single time you sit down to paint. Instead of asking how much water should I add, I want you to start asking a different question. What is the paint doing right now? So here is what that looks in practice. Place your blob of paint and have a drop of water close by. Dip your brush into the water and pull some paint from the blob to create a small pool next to it. Then swirl it around to incorporate the water. If it's too thin, you can always pull in more paint from the original blob. And if it's too thick, just add another small touch of water. But what should we actually be aiming for? When I unload my paint and twist the brush to get a fine tip, like I showed earlier, I do it in small strokes on the palette. And what I'm looking for is for the paint to be opaque, but at the same time slowly retract on itself. That is when you found your sweet spot for a base coat or even a layer. And like we established before, this sweet spot is going to be different for every color. Some paints will get there almost immediately. For example, this old sunny skin tone, don't ask me why, is pretty much perfect straight out of the pot. So long as I spread it properly across the surface, I can get solid coverage without filling in the recesses and loose detail. With others, you'll need to play around with the ratios a bit more. And for me, the back of my hand has become the perfect testing surface to quickly see what's too thick, what's too thin, and what's just right. This way, you're not just forcing every paint to behave the same, you are learning how each one wants to behave. And once you start thinking like this, you stop guessing and you start making small adjustments in real time. A bit more water, a bit more paint, a quick test on the palette, and then you move on. It becomes a loop, and the more you repeat that loop, the faster it becomes. Until eventually you're not even thinking about dilution anymore, you just know. And that's something you can actually see on my palette, where I don't even need to spread the paint out to check how it behaves. I can just tell by how it moves. But that only comes with time. And I know that at the beginning, when people talk about paint feeling smooth, it can sound vague or even a bit frustrating, because how are you supposed to feel through the brush? But that's completely normal. This is a skill, and just like any other, it takes a bit of time and repetition to develop. So don't rush it. Take it slow at first. Pay attention to what your paint is doing and allow yourself to make those small adjustments, because every time you do, you are building that sense of control, and eventually you will reach that point where it all just clicks, where the paint goes where you want it to go and the process starts to feel natural. Not because you followed a perfect recipe, but because you took the time to understand it. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you were able to take something useful from this. If you have any questions, drop them down in the comments, and if you want feedback, you can now share your work or add images over on the community page as well. I will see you in the next one.